All right. Well, welcome to the Larson Hicks show, podcast, whatever it is we call it these days. I'm Larson. It's good to have you here, and I've got Pastor Chris Wiley is here with me. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, Larson, glad to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in a very cool place here.
I know. We're in, so this glass is a Wish You Were Beer glass. That's not where we are. What about yours? I don't know what yours says.
Mine just says, yep, that's what mine says too.
Wish You Were Beer. So that was a place that actually I think used to be in this building.
Okay. They inherited the glasses.
They inherited the glasses.
Yeah.
But we are in Pints and Pixels, which is a really cool pub concept that's got tons of beers on tap and old school video games. So
yeah, it's actually designed, marketed for guys like me who actually played these games in the 80s and stuff. You know?
Well, some of these I grew up playing in the mall, when I was a teenager. So it spans a couple of decades worth of video games, but it's a lot of fun. My kids love coming here. So they were nice enough to let us set up and do our thing here today. And so you're in town. You are a visiting scholar with Trinity, which just means essentially that you come out once in a while, several times a year, and teach and spend time with us. And this is one of the things that we were hoping we'd be able to do, is kind of a ask the pastor, stump the pastor.
Yeah, that's usually what it is. Stump the pastor.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I've experienced this. So what happens, when you're a pastor, is some kid in your church, maybe 17 years old, and reads Richard Dawkins for the first time,
right?
Or Sam Harris,
right?
And it becomes stump the pastor.
Yeah.
So I'm used to that.
You've been there. Okay, good. Well, I don't know if we have any of those questions.
Not saying that any of these folks have read those authors.
But. Well, we'll see. We'll find out. So we asked our church, Trinity Reformed Church in Huntsville, to submit questions. I've got a whole page worth of questions here. First thing, what are we drinking today?
This is a pumpkin ale, and I know that there are people who are like, on principle, they reject
anti-pumpkin
ale. But I get it. But it's okay for like 2-3 weeks a year.
Yeah. Well, and it's actually the first truly cold day. We would call this cold here in Huntsville.
What's it, 72?
Yeah. It dropped below 72. No, I think it was in the 30s this morning.
Yeah,
when I woke up.
It was chilly, yeah.
So it's I think it's appropriate. I'm also drinking the Imperial Pumpkin Ale from I think it's from Straight to Ale, which is like just down the street. So a good choice. Okay, so we're just gonna jump in, and this is gonna be all over the map. But I feel like we should start it with kind of an icebreaker. We know you're a big fan of the Waffle House.
True.
So what is your favorite dish?
Well, I'm a pretty standard, Waffle House guy. I get the waffle, and then I get the bacon and the eggs over easy.
You don't get any hash browns?
Well, yeah. I mean, sometimes that's just kind of part of the package.
It's part of the package.
Yeah, and I'm good with hash browns.
And now, are you a straight hash brown guy, or are you like the smothered chunks?
I'm pretty much straight. I mean, I like it, butter. I like a buttery hash brown. But I mean, the thing about Waffle House, it's the least expensive protein and carbs in the world. It's like the food for every man.
That may be true. I actually heard somewhere that a McDonald's cheeseburger is the cheapest nutrition you can get on the planet.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. So there ought to be like a study.
Yeah.
Like at Harvard or like Yale or something like that. Where do you get the least expensive carbs and protein in the world? Right. And it might be a runoff between Waffle House and McDonald's.
Yeah. Which then the conclusion is we need to get rid of all of the non-profit, charity organizations and just get out of McDonald's way.
There's actually something to that. So I was involved in urban ministry for years, and I was actually a ward of the state for a time, so I know what it's like to live on government surplus food.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Government cheese.
Government cheese and all that kind of thing. And it's awful. I mean, it's just awful stuff. Yeah. I mean, if the choice for your typical kid was McDonald's or government surplus food, it's no contest.
Down.
It's McDonald's and Waffle House every time.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Well, it does say something about, the free market and
by the way, one of the things, you get a lot of sort of meaning or well-intentioned people who get involved in, ministry in, say, the city or whatever, and they go into neighborhoods and they get involved in like economic development. That's what they think they can do.
Right.
Which is really weird because you got all these people who are like in the nonprofit world who know nothing about business, and they're trying to start businesses.
Right.
And they're trying to get people. They get people doing things that no one wants to buy, or producing things no one wants to buy, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it's kind of a feel-good moment. Hey, we're doing this. But I think that opening up a McDonald's in a really blighted neighborhood is probably the best thing you can do in terms of economic development.
That's I'm sure not a commonly held position.
No, I'm like public enemy number one when it comes to my thoughts on economic development in the church world.
Yeah,
and it's been that way forever. Even when I was involved in urban ministry, I was a contrarian.
I've listened to people compellingly talk about just paternalism in charity and the idea of just giving people money, like actually just saying here's some money, or the idea of just giving people like in the third world insurance, like especially crop insurance if you're a farmer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
and just how it changes behavior. It's like, well, once you have access to insurance or banking, or just some cash, the assumption is, well, they're not going to spend it well, and we know how to spend it for them.
Right. Yeah, and you end up with a kind of system where people who are involved in NGOs and so forth do pretty well.
Right. Right.
There was a great documentary that came out years ago, maybe a decade ago, called Poverty Inc.
Okay.
And it goes into some of the sort of strange ways that NGOs try to go about helping people.
Yeah.
And how counterproductive those things are.
Right. Right.
And how just really wicked some of the stuff is that people like Bono or whatever his name is, are all excited about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. And have you read When Helping Hurts?
I have not, but the concept is something I'm familiar with, and I could have wrote it.
Really?
Oh yeah. I did urban ministry for a decade.
Yeah.
And then I was a object of compassion.
Yeah.
In sort of as a teenager, as a warrior state. So.
Yeah, it seems like when you talk to anybody involved in that world, like all of your theories and altruism and a lot of that stuff starts to go out the window. It's like my little brother was in the military, and he always talks about how no plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Yeah, that's where Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they're punched in the mouth.
They get punched in the mouth. That's right. That's right.
Right.
Exactly. And so I think with charity, it's one of those things where we have a lot of grand theories and ideas of how this thing should work, and when it comes down to it, it's just so messy.
Well, my experience is that many people who are idealistic are also presumptuous, and have no clue, how the world actually works, or even they don't understand their own motives, let alone the outlook of people who are the object of their interest in charity. Right.
Well, that's a whole rabbit trail that would be fun to talk more about. But I'll move on. That we started that with a question about Waffle House. One of the other the kind of themes in the questions that came in, there's actually a bunch of themes. One of the themes was kind of women's roles and different aspects of church life and the family. So I think we should dive into some of that. There was also some questions about kids, and I'll jump into one of these here. You talked about you've mentioned before that your kids all enjoyed reading growing up. How did you cultivate that, or how does one cultivate that? Is that just a natural thing?
Well, I do think that some kids are more inclined to read than others. I also think that there is an environment within which they learn to enjoy reading.
Yeah.
And if your house is full of books, it's likely that the kid will get the message that books are a good thing.
Yeah, yeah.
If they see piles of books, or they see you reading books, that kind of thing. So in our home, I was the reader, my wife not so much. And I would, but we both would read to them when they were small.
Yeah.
They'd sit on our lap, and we'd look at picture books, and we'd read to them. And then later on, we'd, read aloud to the kids. But it was always a very, there probably wasn't a day that my children did not see me with a book in my hand reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
So particularly when a father is reading, it signals this is important, this is significant. Moms, of course, are also important and do a lot, particularly at the practical level of, helping kids learn to read it, particularly if they're homeschooled.
Yep.
But a father, almost without intending to, signals something is important by what he does.
Sure.
So if a kid sees dad reading, kid says, that's important.
Right.
If dad does it, then it's a good thing to do.
Yep.
So fathers should be readers. And today, my children are actually more broadly read than I am. I read all the time.
Yeah.
But often the object of conversation, or the subject of conversation when we were together, my three kids and me, is what is everybody reading? And they're getting into stuff that I've never read.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
So they're at a point where they're telling me, no, Dad, that's not what happens in that book.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of thing.
So it's kind of caught more than it's taught.
I think so.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. They've done studies on this, and it's literally comes down to how many books you have in the house.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I believe it. I was listening to a Jordan Peterson episode this week with some neuroscientists, and they were just talking about dopamine and this like this kind of loop that your brain kind of gets into when it's when your dopamine system is kind of hacked, and you sort of, I guess dopamine is sort of creationally designed as a reward for doing hard things. Like it's like your body's way of saying, good job, keep going, keep working.
Yeah.
So it's like this anticipatory thing. But games, the internet, television, it's all kind of been designed to kind of hack into that system.
Right.
And kind of do an in run around it so that you can get the addictive, like sort of habitual byproduct that should be discipline that you're developing, right? And habits, good habits, but it's sort of hacked by kind of modern entertainment.
Well, this is something to also think about, because there are only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
So screen time and book time obviously can't occupy at the same time. One presses the other out.
Yeah.
So how you go about that? I'm against digital books.
Yeah.
Digital books are not the same.
Yeah.
The digital book, it's great to be able to go on an airplane and have 500 books in your Kindle.
Right.
But it's not something that you want to be the first choice in your house. So you actually want physical books.
Yeah.
So, and also I think we ought to have high expectations for our kids in this regard, regardless of where their strengths are.
Yeah.
So my second son is a welder and a furniture maker, and he works for a construction firm in Hartford.
Yeah.
He's one of the kind of lead guys he's only 25, but he takes Dostoevsky to work to read on his lunch break.
Nice.
And that's his normal thing.
Yeah.
So the idea that if you're like a guy who works with your hands, necessarily that means you can't have like intellectual an intellectual life is a total lie.
Sure.
Some of the best craftsmen I've known are great readers.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. It sort of also mirrors the caught not taught thing. Kind of also mirrors like the studies I've seen around church attendance. Where
right.
The children of a mother that attended, but a father who didn't. The rates of persisting in the church over the next generation's life is pretty low, but when dad goes, it's just much, much higher.
Yeah, I think that's because fathers traditionally, and even to this day, even though we live in a very egalitarian world, to this day signal public life.
Yeah.
So what dad's into means this is important in the larger world.
Larger scheme, yeah.
So
That's
what
good.
mom is into, tremendously important.
Yeah.
But it's the domestic sphere.
Yeah.
And so if a kid aspires to be, important in the public sphere, the stuff that dad does signals that.
Yeah. Eugen Rosenstock-Huessy had his cross of reality, and inside, outside, and then future and past. And so in the family, he had daughter is future. She's kind of the future of the family. Son is past. He's sort of the connection to the past that goes into the future. Mom is inside. She sort of defines home, and dad is outside.
This goes all the way back to antiquity in every part of the world. This is not a thing that's just a Western phenomenon. This is a universal human thing.
That's cool. Okay. So on the topic of books, one of our members said they just are asking when you're going to finish writing the sequel to The Purloined Boy.
I finished it twice.
Okay.
And
you did?
Yeah. The problem is the publisher keeps sending it back, saying we want you to make some changes.
Okay.
So I'm satisfied with the
Darn
second
it.
book. but they
They've
keep
turned
sending
it into work.
Well, they have. Now it's not as though their suggestions are bad or something, and it's not like they're trying to make me sort of water things down or anything like that. It's more that every time you work with a commercial publisher, you're not just totally in charge.
Yeah, it's true.
They're the ones who've got the money at risk. You're just like doing. Now, if you self-publish, you can publish
you do whatever you want. Yeah.
But when you're publishing with a commercial publisher, they have a huge say, and they can actually say, "No, this doesn't meet our standards. We're not going to publish this."
Yeah.
So there's some things they're looking for that they have a right to look for.
Yeah.
But I've got 4 book projects in the works, and I write and do all kinds of things. I preach, and so
it's just hard.
Yeah. So this is actually like of the 4, number 4.
Yeah.
On the priority list.
That makes sense. Have you read Nassim Taleb's Skin in the Game?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I feel like there was a part in that book where he talked about when in his process of writing a book, if he gets to a chapter that he doesn't want to write, he just doesn't write it because his thinking is like, if I can't get my own self motivated to write it, then why would I expect anybody else to be interested in it?
Yeah. Going back to this particular series of stories, the book, the series I'm working on, years ago, I had written an entire story, got to a certain point, and I have an old friend who was an editor of mine from back. So I've had like 2 publishing lives. So my 1990s publishing life, I was writing and published. All those books are out of print now.
Okay.
And then I've had my 21st century writing life, and they're completely different lives.
Okay.
Different subjects, different things.
Yeah.
So, but I went back to him, and he was an editor with Thomas Nelson, kind of a big deal in Nashville.
Okay.
And I gave him the manuscript, and he came back to me and said, "This is good stuff, but you need to break it into 2 books." So I said, "Okay." So I broke it up into 2 books, and so I had to rewrite the whole thing. And the first book, The Purloined Boy, is actually the first part of the story. The second part is what I've been working with now.
Okay.
And it's got kind of a different quality. Now, these new editors are saying you need to take that second book and break it up into 2 parts. They literally are telling me to do that. So I'm like, okay, I need to go back, rewrite book 2, and then I've got the stuff kind of to begin book 3. So I was thinking maybe this is a trilogy. It might be a 4-book or even 5-book series by the time I'm done, because the nature of the story, and it's a different process than, say, like Harry Potter. Harry Potter, each book kind of stands on its own.
Right.
And obviously I've got a cliffhanger at the end of The Purloined Boy, and people have been like bugging me for. I get like 2 or 3 letters a month.
Really?
Outraged. they want me to finish.
Why are you doing this to us?
That's right. And I say, I've been trying.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, you bring up an interesting point about sequels and the corporate involvement in writing. You know, there's a business to this whole thing, and you get this. You get a lot of movies where you're like, I wish they would have just stopped with like Matrix. Like, they shouldn't have done a second and a third.
Yeah.
Like if they would have just left it alone, the brand or Star Wars maybe.
Yeah.
So there's that. I'm sure there's that challenge of replicating.
Well, there's that. Now, with my story, there really has not. We've not actually arrived at a resolution.
Okay, good.
We've got a series of cliffhangers, and by the way, the second book will also have a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Nice.
Just so you know, everybody.
Yeah. And so, okay, the second question on that was what does purloined mean?
It means stolen.
Stolen. Okay.
So the story that often comes to mind when people hear the word purloined is the Purloined Letter by
Poe.
Poe.
Yeah, Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. Purloined Letter, and it's and the punchline on that was that the letter was out in the open the whole time.
I don't remember actually that story.
Okay.
And I've read all of Poe's stuff, but it's been years.
Okay.
Now, in my case, for people who are familiar with the story, I thought it had a kind of essence which reminded you of meals, like like tenderloin and stuff like that.
Okay.
And if you know anything about the story, you know that there's a connection there.
Okay. What's your view of Poe? You said you've read all of Poe.
Yeah, well, I think that he was really quite good at what he was trying to accomplish, and he deserves the regard that people have for him.
Yeah.
He's dark, of course.
Yeah.
He's not an author who's writing things that are intended to like encourage you to walk with Christ or something.
Yeah.
He's looking at human depravity, and he's looking at kind of he's really good. Like H.P. Lovecraft, he's good at sort of creating an atmosphere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what you read both Poe and Lovecraft for is atmosphere.
I think Flannery O'Connor was a big fan of Poe's.
Yeah, well, you can see it for sure.
Yeah.
And if you know her stuff, she's also about atmosphere. But she clearly has a Christian agenda.
Yeah.
But you have to have a kind of a nose for it and a willingness to go through this sort of grotesque story to see grace.
Right.
That's what you see in O'Connor.
On the topic of short stories, I feel like a friend of mine who's very, very well read, reads way more than I do, tons of just everything, made the comment. I asked him about his thoughts on Flannery, and he said, I've never read Flannery. He said, and really I've never read short stories for that matter. He's like, I don't see the point of short stories. And I've recently, you told me about Lovecraft. I read a bunch of Lovecraft. I got into Ray Bradbury, read a bunch of his stuff. And there is this, I can see where my friend's coming from. My introduction really to short stories was Flannery. And I'm wondering if she's not an outlier in the world of short stories, because I feel like every one of her stories is in my view, a perfect, self-contained work of art.
Well, that's what short stories should be.
Yeah.
They should be, generally, you don't have a lot of space to develop like a character arc.
Yeah.
So, short stories work more like, Twilight Zone or something.
Yeah.
Where there's some kind of shocker or ending.
Right.
And you have to communicate pretty quickly what a particular character is about. So there's not a lot of like inner tension to resolve or something.
Yeah.
That takes a novel.
Yeah.
So there's usually the shocker ending. So I've written a couple of short stories that have been published, and I enjoy the form, but it's not a form that has much salience today in the book world. It's more of a form that has a place maybe in television or something.
Yeah. It seems like it's short stories tend to be more just kind of a scene, and And when it's good, it's really immersive, and you sort of get sucked right into it. I haven't read anybody yet that I think is even close to Flannery. I'm a zealot for Flannery O'Connor.
Well, she's great.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on from Flannery. So here's a question, just kind of completely different direction. When it comes to habits, so people talk about particularly family habits. So people talk about Bible reading daily. There's a lot of people that are big into like family worship. That's a thing. It's a big thing these days, or at least it seems like a buzzword. How do you think about family habits or things like that?
They're really important.
Yeah.
I think family worship is great. We endeavored to do that with our kids when they were small. But I think family mealtime is huge.
Yeah.
I think I heard Vodi Bakum basically say a father rules his house from the dinner table.
That's good.
And I think that's right.
Yeah.
And I think what you have in a setting like that is basically kind of a time to check in.
Yeah.
So kids are checking in with mom and dad.
Yeah.
What did you do today?
Yeah.
What's going on? That kind of thing. And it's over a meal that you're sharing. So there's something about that is just kind of primal.
Right. Right.
So like when I'm engaged in any kind of pastoral ministry, like if I'm wanting to connect with the men in my church, it's almost always over a meal.
Over a meal.
We say, hey, let's go out and get something to eat. And what that says is, stuff that really is important at like this subliminal level. So, in my house, there were, periods of time where this was more challenging than others, particularly as the kids got busier or whatever.
Yeah.
But then we'd do some things at the table that were kind of fun.
Yeah.
So often there was, I was like the story guy.
Yeah.
So I was, making up stories for them. That's another important thing. I think bedtime, telling your children stories at bedtime. Now, the great thing about books, of course, is that you've got the story. You can read it.
Yeah.
But in my case, there's sometimes I would read a story, but most of the time I'd make the story up.
Yeah.
For them.
That's awesome.
Then, but at the table, I remember one of the things we did for a few years is we would actually create stories together. So we would go around the table, and each of the kids would say what happens next. So I would start it out. So these are the characters. This is the situation. Then I turn to my daughter. What happens next?
Yeah.
And she would say something, and then I turn to one of my sons. What happens next after that?
That's great.
And then next thing you know, you get this absurd
kind
of Mad Lib story.
Yeah. I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to think like I'm maybe I'm too much of a rebel or something, but I tend to bristle a little bit at to me what I perceive as kind of a virtue signal kind of thing, with like, well, in family worship last night we did we did X, Y, or whatever, right. And I'm with you that I think the meal is kind of the place where you set the tone. This is how we relate to each other. This is how we show just daily kindness and grace to one another. It's sacramental. We're breaking bread. And it's the most obvious place for me as a dad to open up the Word and say, hey, I read this, and let me read you these couple of verses that stuck out to me this morning when I was reading the Bible. But there's a, in the course of everyone giving their update on the day, there's a, hey, that's an interesting topic. Let's talk about that. I've always found that to be, and I guess I had this experience recently. I've done a lot of, I say a lot. I think like most evangelicals, kids that grew up in the church, especially who were kind of on fire in the, for Jesus, I've definitely done my fair share of witnessing to people and presenting the gospel to such an extent that I have a hard time when somebody asks me to explain the gospel to them, not reverting to the formula that I was taught and that because I've done it so many times and heard it so many
times. If you were to die tonight and you were to stand before God, and He were to ask you, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say?
Right.
That's just one of them.
Right. No, that's totally one of them. And I had one of the first. I had recently an evangelistic conversation. Was entirely different from any I'd ever had.
Yeah.
And it was this meandering conversation about everything.
Those are always the best.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was and it also felt to me like the Holy Spirit was present. Like it felt to me like somebody else was at the wheel steering this thing, and I was kind of talking about the things that it's kind of the skin in the game thing. I was kind of talking about the things that I thought were relevant and interesting. I was actually listening to the guy that I was speaking with
very important.
And trying to respond, in a meaningful way to what he was saying. And sure enough, I feel like it was a far more meaningful experience for the two of us.
Yeah.
That resulted in me praying for his salvation with him and tears,
Nice,
and it's like, okay, so
great.
I didn't once revert to the script.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same kind of thing at our dinner tables. This like family worship thing.
Right.
There's a model, there's a book, there's a workbook or whatever.
Right.
And I think you turn this thing that can and should be all about an organic, natural relationship, and turn it into this like, I got to check this thing off.
Yeah, I think those are really great observations, and I am 100% with you. I think one of the things we're trying to help our kids with is conversation. Conversation is really important.
Yeah.
And help, so a lot of kids today, it strikes me, don't actually know how to carry a conversation.
Right.
And when you have genuine listening and genuine thought and relevant connections being made to things that people are, it's sort of like, when you get to these canned presentations,
right.
You're trying to figure out, how can we possibly get to the presentation, and like you're sitting at a table with somebody and you're eating spaghetti and you say, this spaghetti reminds me of how messed up our lives are.
That's right. That's right.
It's just like everything in inside it, it's just chaos,
That's right.
Which reminds me, if you were to die tonight.
That's right.
That kind of thing. Whereas if you're just actually, sort of really listening and you're spiritually minded, you actually see how Christian faith is reality.
Right.
It's not like some alien thing that's imposed on reality.
That's right.
But you're actually dealing with reality.
Right.
Then everything really can kind of be brought into
That's right.
That light if you know how to talk.
Yeah.
And listen. That was the thing that you said that's really important. You gotta you gotta listen.
Right. Yeah.
And really care.
It's a two-way thing.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good. That's really good. Well, that helps. I think at least think about some ideas for kinds of things you can do, but also kind of some higher level considerations. Another question that came up was, and again, we're bouncing all over, but what questions would you want the father of your daughter-in-law to ask your sons during their courting period? Like what kind of things would you expect? I mean, you've been in both seats, right? So you're as a father to both sons and daughters who are gone through that phase of courtship and engagement. So what are the kinds of questions you think are important?
Yeah, the way that question is framed is sort of like a mental sort of like
I tried to simplify it, but
yeah, because both my sons had those conversations with their future fathers-in-law,
right,
and they're both married now, and apparently they did okay.
Yeah.
So, and
the question is, did the father-in-law do okay?
I don't know. I mean, I never asked them. I don't know if maybe I asked one of my sons about a conversation. What did you guys talk about?
Yeah.
But I can't recall.
Well, he approved of your son, so clearly he made a good choice.
Yeah. Well, I know in my case with my daughter, I can speak to that.
Yeah.
What you're you can kind of think about it as a set of priorities. There's first order, second order, third order, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So first order obviously have to do with the Christian faith.
Yeah.
Kind of, sort of assessing whether or not the man you're speaking to, the young man you're speaking to, is the real deal.
Yeah.
And is capable of leading a household.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a borderline thing, because there's obviously, okay, we have a lot of young men out there who can, pass the membership exam.
Yeah.
And demonstrate that they believe in Christ. But we have fewer young men who actually demonstrate they can actually lead anything.
Yeah.
And what you're looking at when you're looking at a prospective son-in-law is, can you do both? Can he command, and I mean that in the best sense, the respect of his daughter, of my, your daughter?
Yeah.
So now, when I say command, I don't mean somebody saying respect me.
Right. Right.
What you're talking about is how you conduct yourself.
Yeah.
So that the respect comes easy.
Right.
So what you want, the Scripture tells wives to respect their husbands.
Right.
Some men are hard to respect.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the command is null and void.
Right.
But
sure.
what do you want in a son-in-law? You want a son-in-law who's easy to respect.
Right.
So your daughter can respect him without even having to even think about it. Just not even trying.
Right.
So.
Well, and that's also a that's relative to the daughter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you got to think about your daughter, what her strengths and weaknesses are, what she needs, those sorts of things. So, I've got a future son-in-law. My daughter is engaged to a young man, and he's a fine young man, and I've had a number of conversations with him, and he's passed,
Yeah.
In fact, I could sense in the first 5 minutes that he was good. There were other guys who came along that I said no.
Yeah.
I actually said no.
What? Could you explain that a little bit? Like, why did you say no?
Well, there were certain signals, certain things I could see. Well, so when you're a father and you're assessing a prospective son-in-law, it's actually the same kind of thing you do with every man you meet.
Yeah.
Can I respect this guy?
Yeah.
There are lots of different things that are subtle indicators that say no, or maybe. You don't want to be no or maybe when it comes to your son-in-law. You want to be yes.
Yeah.
So, I had, the difficult task of saying to my daughter, in particular case, no, that's not going to be a guy that's going to work.
Yeah.
And I think that she knew that.
Yeah.
But, a lot of, often young women are taken with the fact that, they're the object of someone's attention and affection. And,
yeah. Feels good.
Yeah, it feels good. But I think she had her own doubts. But it was nice to have me confirm those doubts and to say, yeah, we need to make sure that this doesn't go any further. And I can be the bad guy. I'm the heavy. You can say to him, my dad doesn't approve and that kind of thing. And it's just over for you.
Yeah.
But, in the second case, like when you're like in a business encounter,
sure,
you can know in the 5 minutes whether or not you can trust the guy that you're talking to. It's those sorts of nonverbal cues, just different things. If we want to spell it all out, we can talk about how does he sort of what's his deportment, what's his confidence level, what's his intelligence level, those sorts of things. Now, it doesn't mean you're 100% sure. I mean, it's not like you can say with the kind of certainty that God can say about what the future holds. But in terms of, now, another thing to keep in mind is it doesn't necessarily mean that this guy is everything you want. So you have to, like, again, getting back to primary, secondary, tertiary things. If you're talking about tertiary things, now we're in the realm of taste.
Yeah, right, right.
So, when it comes to that stuff, then you're more or less thinking, well, hey, he's got different interests, he's got different aptitudes, that's fine. Then the question is it a good fit with my daughter?
Yeah.
And then you can sort of assess it in that way. So you can respect, the young man and, approve of the young man, but not necessarily sort of like make him your bosom buddy.
Right, right.
That kind of stuff, So I think you need to be able to sort all that stuff out. And I think sometimes dads err on both sides. I think some dads are like, I'm out to lunch, whatever you want, girl. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I approve, whatever.
Yeah.
In fact, some of those guys couldn't even imagine themselves saying no.
Right.
And then you got the other extreme is unless he's exactly everything I've always pictured, then no. I think that's crazy too. So you need to have a kind of an assessment, kind of wisely assess.
Yeah.
What's this particular young man? What's my daughter like? Do they make a good fit? That kind of thing.
I said, Rich Lusk and I had an episode. Our last podcast episode was about dating. And one of the comments, have you read? I'm sure you've read the eggs. Sperm is cheap, eggs are expensive.
I'm familiar with the statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful book, tremendous book. Lots of just great practical wisdom, stuff you're not allowed to say.
Sure.
But that's like.
It's always the best things.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. But he said one of the things he says in the book is, which is one of those just obvious things, but nobody says it, is that like a young woman, in her late teens, early to mid 20s, late teens, 20s, is pretty much at the pinnacle of the sexual marketplace.
That's true.
Right? And so it's a crass way to talk about it as a marketplace, but you extend the metaphor and say, okay, well, if I want the most buying power to get the absolute highest quality man I can get for my daughter, then there is an optimal window of opportunity here that I should, as a wise father, take advantage of. And I think your comment about the tertiary things, I think some folks get too hung up on the tertiary things, and they push out too far past that sweet spot where you're really, the best candidates are out there, they're looking, and they're going to get snatched up by somebody, right?
Yeah, and when you're working with a daughter, it's very different than working with sons.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole different kind of dynamic.
Yeah, for sure.
So with sons, the coaching you provide is like how to initiate. With the daughters, your coaching is like how to evaluate.
Yeah.
So that kind of different things,
Yeah.
So now obviously there's an evaluative element to what kind of girl you should pursue, and there's a how should you set the with the girl the trap.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But I do think that they're just different realities.
Yeah.
And so you need to be able to give good advice on both sides of that. But I think that we have done a really tremendous disservice to young women by not just dealing with the facts on the ground. What are the facts on the ground, young woman? The facts on the ground are what you said.
Yeah.
So with young men, what I told my boys is I said, guys, individually, because I would get together and talk. We talk about this stuff all the time. Your social sort of value, your marketplace of the mating game value is only going to go up.
Yeah.
With time.
Yeah.
Because you have more earning power.
Yeah.
And the pool of women that you have to choose from grows.
Right.
So think about it this way: if you're 20 years old, you're likely to be only sort of considered an appropriate match with maybe a girl 21, 22 to 18.
Yeah.
You're 25. You could still marry the 18-year-old girl.
Right. Right.
And nobody's going to blink.
Right.
But you can marry the 27-year-old girl too.
Right.
You're 30. You can still marry the 18-year-old girl. Now, at that point, people are like saying, "Well, it's robbing the cradle," but no one's going to stop you.
Right. Right. Right.
Now, your pool gets bigger, and your social credit score grows as your earning power grows, as your social status. It's the reverse for girls.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So her pool gets smaller.
Yeah, it's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
And all the objective data confirms this.
Right.
It's not like I'm saying anything that's like, how could he possibly say something so benighted? No, we've got the data.
Right. Well, I love it. I mean, I think you're right. I think it's not a popular thing to say, but I think if we're just trying to help people think about these things in a way that's practical, this isn't to say any of this stuff is immovable or fixed in stone for every single situation, but good it's good wisdom. It's proverbial, and it works. So on this topic I think you and I talked about your daughter in particular going to college. I hope she doesn't mind us talking about her so much. But one of the things we talked about was the challenge of being a dad of a really smart, theological, philosophically minded young lady. That's kind of that's just an interest. I mean, it's not a wildly uncommon thing, but it is, I think, in our circles probably presents somewhat of a conundrum for some people. How did you guys think about that?
Yeah, well, as you noted, my daughter's bright. She scored in the top 1% on the SAT in both the language and the math.
Yeah, wow.
You know? So she didn't want to go to college. And I said, sweetie, do you want to spend the rest of your life correcting your husband's English? That was
awesome.
My sort of thing.
That's
and
great.
She was like, no, I don't.
That's
I said, well, you probably need to kind of go into a pool.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. A woman needs to sort of think about what is the pool that I want to be in.
Yeah.
And who's fishing there.
Right.
So if you're a really bright girl, you want to be in a place where bright guys are fishing.
Yeah.
Looking for a wife. So I said, you're unlikely to get that in Sunday school at our church.
Yeah.
We know all the guys. They're good boys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing
Sure.
wrong with them.
Yeah.
But you probably need somebody that's not in that pool.
Yeah.
So where are you gonna find that? Well, colleges are kind of a sorting mechanism.
Yeah.
So if you go to a good school, kind of an elite school, you're likely to find a guy who's going to be easy for you to respect. And that was my main thing. I wanted somebody that was easy for her to respect. So she went to a good college, an elite school, and sure enough, it happened.
Yeah.
Of course, I was praying the whole time.
Sure.
There was a suitor, as I noted earlier, that I didn't approve of that was there. And anyway, we're heading toward the finish line here. The wedding is going to happen in a couple of months.
Nice. That's awesome.
And we're anticipating a happy marriage.
Yeah. So in the Kevin DeYoung article that came out in the last week or two, you shared it. I thought it was great. I reshared it on Facebook. He talked about college and about how if you looked at the literature, if you sat in on the classes, even of all the best Christian schools out there.
Yeah.
The assumption you'd walk away with is that none of these young ladies are going to go be mothers or wives. Like, they're all going to be professional career women.
That's definitely the message, and I'll name names that you get at Wheaton College.
Yeah, yeah.
So Wheaton is an elite school.
Yeah.
It's a top 100 school.
Right.
I'm talking top 100, including the Ivies.
Yeah.
So it's a good school.
Yeah.
But the message that those young women receive at Wheaton, and my oldest son went to Wheaton, and so did my oldest daughter-in-law. Yeah. Very bright girl.
Yeah.
The message they got repeatedly was like, success is career.
Yeah. 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 So I love that. It's kind of a different rabbit trail, but one is, you had as a father, you had a purpose and a design in mind for sending your daughter to school that despite what she may or may not have been hearing in the classroom, which of course is another question. Schools to avoid, schools not to avoid. But regardless of what she may or may not have been hearing there, your design was, we're preparing for your calling, and a calling it sounds like she was excited about.
Yeah, she never chafed at it. In fact, this is what she wanted. So before she got to know the young man that she's engaged to, she was actually thinking that she might have to settle to be a college professor.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah.
That was plan B.
Yeah, plan B. Yeah. Well, I mean, but the strategy was, as you said, this is we're looking for a pool of the kinds of men that you are going to be have a better time respecting, honoring, but also, I mean, I was talking to my son about this. The part of the idea is that he's got a mission, and he's got a helper on that mission, and so in a real sense, her calling is his calling. So you're looking for a suitable. Right. So if you got a woman who's inclined towards theology, philosophy, literature, higher order stuff that not many, not most are maybe in both genders.
Sure.
She's going to be probably a rock star helper to someone in that field. Right. She'd be a serviceable helper to an auto mechanic or somebody who's doing something completely different. Right. But the question is about wisdom and a good match.
Yeah. So her fiance aspires to be a college professor.
Yeah.
Which is a great setup for my daughter, because then, she's conversant. She can talk about the same subjects that he does, so she could, provide the home environment.
Yeah.
For entertaining, really, high-level intellectuals and things like that, and actually engage in the conversation at the table and make good points and things like that.
So on the topic, you named names on the college front. That's a big topic in our church. It was one of the questions is what colleges, can you name more names? Like what colleges out there? You're on the board at New St. Andrews. You've got kids at a bunch of different schools, or have had kids at a bunch of different Christian schools. What colleges would you say are kind of top of the list right now?
Yeah, I would say there are schools that I could recommend to anybody, and then there are schools that I would recommend only under certain conditions.
Yeah.
So like schools I could recommend to anybody, obviously New St. Andrews is a good place to be. Great people, good faculty, inexpensive, all the things that we can support. I think Grove City is pretty good.
Yeah.
I think that there are certain things about Grove City that I have questions about right now, having to do with some things that have come out with regard to how they've handled certain matters, like CRT and stuff like that. Yeah. But they are far better than 99% of the Christian College Coalition. So let's we need to make sure that we don't overstate things or make things seem there are questions. A really good school of it. Another good school is Hillsdale. Hillsdale is a great school.
Yeah.
Places like Wheaton or maybe your standard evangelical college, you are going to
Biola.
You're going to encounter a kind of leftist evangelicalism that may be unfamiliar to you. Yeah. So it depends on the kid. So, or the young person. Yeah. I'm revealing my age. But if the young person is really solid and is capable of discerning the good and the bad in any situation, probably that child is going to be fine just about anywhere. Yeah. That's true. They could go to Harvard or Yale or whatever, and be okay. But the school itself, then the question is why are you going there? Yeah. So when you think about a place like Harvard, I spent a little time there. I know the Ivies a little bit. What you're buying, with an education at those places is the social sort of cachet of the institution, and the education. The signal. Yes, the brand. Signal. Yeah. Yes, the brand. And the education may not actually be as good as at a place like Hillsdale, in terms of what you're actually getting in terms of attention but you're now part of a club. Yeah. Literally a club. For sure. Like I'm an alumnus of Harvard Divinity School, and I'm actually able to go into any Harvard club. Literally, they have Harvard clubs in every major city. Yeah. Okay. And be welcome. Yeah. So that's a great place to, like, if you want to impress your friends. Hey, let's go to the Harvard Club. Yeah. Yeah. But that's a lot of what it is. It's sure. That stuff. So are you in it for that reason? That's something to think about. And so the schools I mentioned, Grove City, New St. Andrews, Hillsdale, probably a place like Patrick Henry. Yeah. Good, solid school. Are places that just from top to bottom are going to be unwoke. Yeah. Yeah, they might have an occasional chapel speaker who says something that you don't stupid. Like or whatever. Yeah. But generally, the Christian College Coalition. So here's something to kind of know if you're a parent thinking about these things. The school that you went to 30 years ago is different. Yeah. You think you're sending your kid to the school you went to. You're not.
Yeah.
Another thing to know is that even if your school has like a lot of, sort of advertising to present itself as Christian, there are a lot of different people who have, ideas about what that means.
Yeah.
And some of those people are not on the same page with you.
Yeah.
That's another thing to think about. Third thing to think about is what goes on in an institution today is a bit different than the way it was maybe 50 years ago. So, when you think about baseball, I remember when baseball players played for the same franchise their entire life.
Yeah.
And they hated not only people on the other team,
right?
They hated people in the other league. I mean, with real venom.
Yeah.
You'd watch the old All-Star games and like Pete Rose is like almost killing people.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of thing. Now, with free agency, everybody knows I might end up playing for those guys.
Right.
There's not the same kind, and the same thing's true with the academy. So let's say you're a professor at like Gordon College.
Yeah.
You're actually interacting with not just your colleagues in other Christian liberal arts institutions. You're interacting with your colleagues in secular institutions, and you're concerned about your standing in their eyes.
Right.
So you care about what that atheist in your discipline thinks about you at the neighboring liberal arts college.
Right.
So how does that affect, the quality of education at your typical Christian liberal arts college? It has a detrimental effect.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why we're seeing kind of a sort of an eating away, sort of a decay with regard to Christian standards and sort of a willingness to make strong stands has to do with this.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut off any future, sort of career prospects.
Right. Right.
And I don't want my school to be seen as that school.
Yeah.
Oh, you're from that school.
Right.
Oh, you're the school that, doesn't, promote, personal pronoun choice. So now you're embarrassed because, I'm associated with this school.
Right.
Now, there are a lot of spiritually mature Christian professors at these schools who have paid the price, counted the cost. I'm not talking about those people.
Yeah.
But there are far more people who are wishy-washy, squishy, afraid of offending folks. Just like we see in the evangelical church, pastors who are like, they got their wet finger to the wind, trying to pick up what's the latest social trend and how can we give it a Jesus kiss.
Right.
That same thing happens in the colleges.
Yeah, it's a big topic, but just political correctness, to me is a cancer that affects any large institution, but it extends to it also to your point.
So here's another problem.
Yeah.
Many board members at colleges who are charged with overseeing the integrity of their institutions, both financially, but also missionally, are completely out of touch.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation last night with a board member, in fact, the chairman of a board of a college, and he's just now learning about DEI. He had no clue.
Yeah.
You're like, what
is that? Yeah.
That's what, and he says, I'm learning about this, and I'm like appalled.
Yeah.
And I go to my other board members, they don't even want to know about it.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people charged with the oversight of these schools, who have zero sort of understanding about what is going on in different disciplines in the academy.
Right.
What are the trends in education, these kinds of things. So, you've got alumni who are living in the past. They're supporting schools because that was my school and I went there 40 years ago. And then you have board members who are not up to speed on what the situation on the ground is, have no idea what their professors actually teach or believe, and then when they find out, they're like, I can't accept it, I can't believe it, and then they go into denial mode.
Right.
So then you got the administrators, and mainly, they're interested in accreditation and money from the federal government.
Right.
And both of those things come with strings.
Yeah.
And people wonder, why is stuff drifting the way it is?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, and I wish that it was only universities that were dealing with this, but it extends. I'm in the healthcare world, and it's the same thing. I mean,
Yep.
it's you wish that doctors just cared about taking care of patients, and they wish they could too, right?
Yeah.
Believe me.
Yeah.
But the reality is, everyone's got to think about their careers and about.
See, this is what the liberals, the progressives, the Marxists are really good at.
Yeah.
Knowing where the thumb screws are
That's
and
right.
how to turn them.
Well, an example in my, we do a lot of work in emergency medicine. There's the American College of Emergency Physicians, right? Which, from a brand standpoint, everyone views as, well, that's the most important, voice in emergency medicine. And so when they come out strongly about abortion or about COVID or about fill in the blank, every emergency physician in the country goes, I guess I gotta go along with this. I'm certainly not going to say anything publicly that's going to go against that, right?
So that's exactly what this board member I spoke with last night, he said, I speak to the members of the board, and they're just like, well, I guess we'll have to go along.
Yeah. Well, you made a comment yesterday when we were talking about some of this stuff that what underlies a lot of this, at least in the college, and I think this is true in business and in churches, is this desire to, well, is there an option where we can just not offend anybody? And as you were talking about it yesterday, what occurred to me was, well, no, the answer is no. There's not an option where you can't offend anybody. So then the next thing is, well, how do we offend the fewest people? The fastest way to do that is to align yourself with the people who have the biggest microphone, which are the people who are the best at marketing. And so it comes down to, the game all comes down to who's the best at marketing, who's the best at public relations, who's the best at broad communication. They get to decide.
And contrast this with Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you don't have life. And then a bunch of people say, well, this is a hard saying.
Yeah.
And they leave.
Yeah, right.
And then he turns to his disciples and he says, you're still here?
Yeah.
He said, let me amp it up a little bit and say something even more offensive.
Yeah, that's right.
So he was all about kind of sorting it out. And we're not like that. There's a time to gather stones. There's a time to scatter stones. This is from Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
So we're in a scattering stone time. This is a scattering time.
Right.
So what we need to think about is, okay, what do we scatter about?
Right.
Then when we think about it, what do we gather to?
Right.
So what are the things that we're thinking about? So I think that the thing that we need to really just reconcile ourselves to is that we're in a scattering time.
Yeah.
And stop with the nonsense.
Right.
Just accept it. This is a scattering time.
Yeah.
And it's a separation time.
Yeah.
It's a sheep and goats time.
Yeah.
It's a who's with me and who's not with me time.
Well, and it takes eyes of faith, at a minimum, just faith in God, but also just some degree of enough creativity to put yourself 10, 20 years out into the future. I think it was James Wood at the conference you guys had recently talked about. I'll be really interested to see what the detransitioners.
Yeah, we're already seeing a little bit of that.
Right, like how they feel 10 years from now.
I'm expecting huge class action lawsuits.
Right, and who are they going to be angry with, and who are they going to view as the silent complicit people?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, we talk about Nixon talked about the silent majority. We need to talk about the silent complicity.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I heard somebody during the middle of COVID talk about, I think it was a governor in California that was like the only, or a mayor of some town in California, is like the only one in the state who was just saying, no, we're not going to do all this stuff. And I think when I heard, I think it was a woman, when she was talking about it, she said, if you listen to the Nuremberg trials, it all came down to how soon did you know? When did you know what? you know, and at some point you can no longer argue
Pretend.
ignorance.
Yeah.
And so the question then becomes, so when did you know? And you know, so many people have been so vocal about the conspiracy theorists, which means you listened and heard the conspiracy theories, you knew about them, you heard all the arguments, and you decided to align yourself with the power and the influence and the respectable.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're seeing is that our big EVA leaders were complicit.
Totally.
They just went along with everything, and now the other shoe is dropping, and we're discovering a lot of things about the measures that were taken that didn't have sound science. You think about the science. You know, this is something that we got preached. Over or
or beat over the head with us.
Yeah, that's it. So, and now we're like, what was that really about, dude?
You keep using that word.
That's right. I don't think you know what that means. Right?
I don't think it means what you think it means.
That's right. So the science is just a stupid phrase.
There's a little TM next to it.
Yeah, and then the fact that, and I've got. So here's the weird thing. I've got. So my wife and I are both kind of, you know, from families with lots of academics and artists and you know, woke people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We have people in our family now who are like triple, quadruple vaxxed.
Yeah.
Who won't talk to us because we're not vaxxed.
Right.
And we're doing fine, and they're still living in their, you know, and not coming out.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not exaggerating.
No, I believe it.
And so we're like, well, I mean, if we were like on our deathbeds, if we were on respirators, we would say, "You were so right. We were so wrong."
Right. Sure. Yeah.
But it's the reverse. We're fine. And who knows what you've put into your body?
That's right.
And how it's going to play out.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think the and this comes to the political correctness thing. You know, the concept of winsomeness, you know, in churches where there's this false argument, very compelling argument, very pervasive argument that the way that the church is going to have the most influence is to be as winsome as possible.
The way we're going to have the most influence is by not looking distinct at all.
Right.
Trying to blend in.
Right.
To the wall.
Yeah, how's that work?
Yeah, well, this is just so
Donald
stupid
Trump.
In so many ways. What it demonstrates is a lack of confidence. So, you know, I remember when I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I was, you know, surrounded by progressives and Marxists and all that. Never, I'm not exaggerating, they never cared what they said made me feel. They weren't trying to win me with being nice.
No, of course not.
They were trying to intimidate me.
Yeah.
Make me feel ashamed.
Yeah.
For what I believed, and you know, if they walked away, you know, sort of with this kind of broken relationship, they could care less.
Yeah. Right.
They could care less.
Right.
And they're winning.
Right. Well, it's evil. I think we would look at that and say that's evil. That's just intimidation. That's just bullying. But it's a whole lot more effective than what we're doing. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying let's go do what they're doing, but certainly if you're making a pragmatic argument that I'm just not going to weigh in on that issue because I want to be winsome, I don't want to offend anybody.
Where's your confidence? Yeah. That's the thing I think. Where's your confidence?
Right.
I remember years ago there was a guy named George Hunter III, and he was speaking at Yale, and I was in the audience, and he said he was addressing missions, believe it or not. He was actually at the Overseas Ministry Study Center, which is located at Yale. And he said, what we lack today is apostolic confidence. That phrase stuck with me, apostolic confidence.
Yeah.
So when the Apostle Paul went to Athens, the Cambridge, the Harvard, the Oxford of that world, he didn't shy away from saying at the very end of his sermon or his address, and this man will judge the world. No, he didn't like make an appeal to, you know, forgiveness of
Right.
sins. He didn't
Right.
even, I don't even know, as I think about it, I do think he mentions, I have to go back and look, but he's building to the climax, and the climax is the resurrection, which he
Yeah.
knew was going to offend both the Epicureans and the Stoics.
Yeah.
He knew it.
Yeah.
He was smart. He
Yeah.
had read their stuff. He knew that was going to, and that's why he saved it to the end.
Yeah.
And then he said, not only did God raise this man from the dead, but by raising him from the dead, he's saying that he's going to, through this man, judge the world. The end. Altar call time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
So can you be more offensive?
Yeah.
So and then people use the Paul at the Areopagus, Mars Hill, to say this is our strategy, winsome strategy. Notice how we
Right.
No, you don't even understand the audience he's talking to.
Right.
That's why you think he's being winsome.
Right. Right.
He's being very, very savvy.
Yeah.
He knows what they think. He quotes their poets, as he says.
Yeah.
He's well read. He's from Tarsus. Tarsus was like a center of Stoic philosophy. So
Yep.
he grew up in an environment surrounded by Stoics.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I don't think we appreciate. Paul was comfortable in a Greco-Roman environment. He was a Roman citizen. He read Greek philosophy. He had to, if he's going to quote him
Yeah.
from memory
Yeah.
on the spot.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And then he's obviously a Jewish scholar, studied under Gamaliel. That's like the Harvard of the Jewish world.
Yeah.
This guy is super sharp. He's like A-list in both worlds. He's a
Right.
clerk in the Supreme Court,
Right.
the Sanhedrin. So this guy is super, stellar
Yeah.
in both worlds, and he's comfortable in both worlds. He's not faking it.
Yeah.
He's not trying to pass as a Greek, sort of authority. He actually is.
Right. Right. Right.
He's not pretending. He's not LARPing.
Right. Exactly. No, it's such a. I mean, it's such a. Yeah, it comes back to the evangelism conversation a minute ago. Is if you're genuine and you've got sincere interest and you're willing to do the work to have something. The Holy. We believe that Paul was inspired by the Holy Spirit.
Sure.
But the Holy Spirit had a lot to work with. In Paul's case, right?
That's right.
So Paul gave the Holy Spirit a lot of material to work with.
Right.
And so what we get is what Paul
And
presented.
he gets up and he's not apologizing. He's not trying to be winsome.
Right.
He's actually very, he's got strong convictions, and he's going to communicate those.
Yeah.
Without apology.
Yeah.
And do we do that?
Right. Okay. So Jerry. So it's kind of as a segue from winsomeness and what Paul was doing, at Mars Hill, Areopagus. Jerry Boyer's got a podcast where he, it's called Meeting of Minds Podcast, and he has all of these thought leaders from all over the place on his podcast, and frequently they're Christians, frequently they're not, which is great. I love the podcast. He just had Peter Thiel on for a second time, and Peter and he spent most of the episode talking about Gerard. I'm a huge fan of Gerard, and I'm a huge fan of Peter Thiel. The thing that I think is tricky, that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is throughout the episode, Peter Thiel really comes across as a Christian, and I don't know that he ever. I think he may or may not at some point say I'm a Christian. I know that Jerry says, "Well, we conservative Christians," and he's referring to himself and Thiel. He said, for lack of a better term, we're conservative Christians. He goes ahead and says that, and Thiel doesn't correct him. So I know that Thiel is homosexual. But you listen to the guy and you're like, man, this guy's got so much right. Like, this guy knows a lot of really wonderful things. So the question to me is, I found myself in it because I listened to the episode with my kids, with several of my kids, teenagers, and we're talking about it afterwards. and they're like, so wait, is Peter Thiel a Christian? It seems like he's a Christian. And so I found myself in this place where I'm like, well, no, he's living in open rebellion to the black and white letter of Scripture. So if he's a Christian, he's a Christian that's living in rebellion. But yeah, he gets a lot right. And I found myself trying to kind of put my finger on the scale for him. You know, like, well, you know, we don't know how he grew up. We don't know what kind of church he's in.
Actually, we do know how he grew up.
Okay. Well, so, you know, stuff like that, where I'm trying to, but it brings back the 1 Corinthians 5, you know, exhortation from Paul about, he's talking about sexual immorality specifically. I mean, he talks about other things, but that's kind of the centerpiece of the chapter of really the book. And he says you shouldn't even eat with such a one. Like you shouldn't sit down and break bread with somebody. And specifically, Paul says when they call themselves a brother, right? And so that was where it's like, okay, the category of like, I'm happy to talk to a non-believer, subject matter expert about whatever. Just in general, happy to talk to a non-believer about whatever. Happy to talk to a Christian about whatever. But there's this, like Paul's saying something there that we have to obey, right? And it seems like what he's saying is if they're a Christian, if they call themselves a Christian and they're in open rebellion, we shouldn't even hang out with them. So anyway, I actually sent an email to Jerry about this, hoping to have a dialogue with him. And I know I'm like number 1,000 on his list of things, so it doesn't bother me that I haven't heard back. But I am eager to flesh this out, because there's a lot of us who have family members who are gay, who still call themselves Christians. How do you think about that passage?
Well, I mean, there are a couple things to talk about here. One is the passage, but then there's just sort of the situation on the ground that we find ourselves in. So my understanding is that Thiel grew up in a Christian environment.
Yeah.
He is a Christian home.
Yeah.
He's got a very, I think, high level of comfort with people like us.
Yeah.
Because of that. Now, he's also a part of a larger world of sort of technological innovation and investing and
venture
that kind
capital.
Of thing.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is a real challenge for people who come out of very solid Christian homes is if they're entering into the sort of elite cultural spaces. What do you do with people who are on the same page with you 80% of the time?
Right.
70% of the time?
Right.
60% of the time? Do you just not interact with them at all?
Right.
Or do you say, okay, we've got some things that we have in common, let's work together on those things?
Let's talk about those things, yeah.
So, like, when you're in a place like Corinth, which was, like, wild in antiquity. I mean, everybody in antiquity thought of Corinth in the same way we think of San Francisco.
Yeah.
So there was a term to Corinthianize, which meant to sexually corrupt.
Wow. Okay.
So there was a church there, and guess what? They had a lot of problems with this stuff.
Yeah.
And so, Paul is dealing with that stuff on the ground. But when you find yourself, say, at a place like Harvard, or you're in Cambridge, or you're in Berkeley, or you're in Oxford, and you interact with people that maybe you would disagree with very strongly about a certain range of things, does that mean that you can't talk to them about other things or work together on stuff? So, like, that's how I think about Peter Thiel. So, Peter Thiel, so the National Conservatism Conference took place in Miami, and the guys who were at our conference, we sponsored in Battleground, Joe Rigney and Aaron Wren and James Wood, they were all on the plane that night after the conference was over to get to Miami because they were speaking at that.
Wow.
The next day.
Yeah.
So they spoke at my church and they spoke at NatCon. And Peter Thiel was one of the major speakers at NatCon, along with Yoram Hazony, who was a Jewish, sort of Orthodox Jew, very observant, obviously doesn't acknowledge Christ as, the Son of God. So what do you do with that? Well, I think that when you get to a certain sort of place in terms of cultural work and influence, you have to make certain alliances. So, like let's think about World War II. You know, the United States and United Kingdom had a lot, you know, that they were on the same page with, but they found themselves also on the same side of the war with Soviet Union.
Yeah.
You know, so like the United States and United Kingdom, 95% of the time we're on the same page. With the Soviet Union, maybe 40% of the time.
Right.
We have a common enemy in the Nazis, and so we're going to work on that. That's the way you got to think about this stuff.
Right.
So now, getting back to Jerry and Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
I don't know what Jerry's take on that is, but I suspect his take is similar to mine.
Yeah.
I don't know if he really, I don't know how he really thinks about Peter. I've talked to Jerry a few times, and I think Jerry's super sound.
Yeah, I do too. So,
my guess is that, you know, and this is the thing, so the more purist you are, this is my observation, the further you are away from centers of power.
Yeah.
So, you know, guys, like I come across guys.
Well, and I sort of wear as a badge, and I think a lot of people in our community, in our circles, do wear as a badge our fundamentalism. You know, like, hey, look, we're fundamentalists. We're okay with that. You know, we're deplorable. You know.
Yeah, and by the way, there are certain intellectual elites who are also okay with associating with fundamentalists and deplorables.
Yeah.
So the question is what do you do when they're Catholic?
Right.
Roman Catholic, which a lot of them are.
Right.
So occasionally I'll get, you know, somebody who says to me, "Oh, I would never have that Roman Catholic on my show."
Right.
I'm like, "What hole do you live in? You know, how far are you away from Washington, New York City, and Los Angeles?"
Right.
I can tell how far you are away from those places by the fact that you can't see a friend and recognize a friend.
Right.
Now, yes, we have some very strong disagreements about the order of salvation, but we both recognize that Jesus is the Son of God.
Right.
You know, that's pretty big.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. I think the application. I mean.
Now, getting to the matter of the sexual practices.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know Peter Thiel.
Yeah, I don't either.
I suspect that he knows that we condemn, and the Scripture condemns. And I've never heard Peter Thiel say, "I'm a Christian." I've heard him say, "I'm a Gerardian."
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and he talks about the Bible a lot.
He knows.
Talks about sin a lot. Like he understands human nature, and he seems to agree with the biblical view of a lot.
Yeah. So now what we may be talking about is a particular sin issue in someone's life, and we should be praying for Peter.
Yeah.
You know, if he genuinely trusts in Christ for his salvation. Now, the thing about, you know, Thiel is that he's in an environment where very few of the people he interacts with on a daily basis think the way we do.
Right. That's
he lives,
true.
You know, he's kind of in a world where he's probably affirmed all the time.
Right.
In that respect.
Yeah, and that's where I get back to, you know, okay, so was Paul in 1 Corinthians 5, was he imagining a podcast between an Anglican financial advisor in Pittsburgh and a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley who's, I think, about to expatriate to St. Kitts or something? Like,
is Thiel going to do that?
Somebody told me that the other day when I brought him up.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
He's a globalist.
Yeah.
He's like,
you know,
even though he appears at NatCon.
He just, side note, he did two talks. He did two talks at Stanford with N.T. Wright, talking about basically an optimistic eschatology and the technological concept of of singularity. And so anyway, that was fascinating. It was actually really fun. But I guess maybe the direction to go with this is what is 1 Corinthians 5 talking about? He's talking to a small church community, and he's saying you need to put these people out of the church. And I would happily say, if Peter Thiel was at my church, he would be excommunicated.
Yeah,
right. And we'd pray for him to repent and turn back. But so the nice thing about that context is you can excommunicate somebody, and then you can have them over dinner and evangelize to them. And the expectations are all in the right place. Like, you're not a believer. We don't believe you're a believer anymore, and we're trying to call you to repentance.
Well, I think there's something to be said about that. I do think that a person who is subject to church discipline in that way is to be kind of reminded of his excommunication.
Yeah.
So there are constraints that we are under.
Sure.
With how do we relate to that person?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say you have them over and say we're all friends. It's like, hey, you're in rebellion. You're in high rebellion here, and we can't even call you a Christian anymore. You know, can't call you a brother anymore.
Right.
I'm not actually trying to get into the. Although I will say, I mean, I do know plenty of people who have a brother or sister, who's gay, and who swear, who totally believes they're a Christian, and I think in that situation, I've had several kind of pastoral type conversations with people in that situation, and the question is, what do I do? Do I have them over? What do I tell my kids? How do we talk about it? And I think at some level, you have to say, well, your responsibility is to your wife, your kids, to train them. It's not to evangelize that person as much as you love them. And so 1 Corinthians gives us a pretty strong warning about that, and you're probably better off keeping your distance.
Well, I think that's true. I do think that it's particularly the prerogative of the father to establish boundaries.
Yeah.
And to enforce those.
Yeah.
So one of those boundaries may be we're not having Uncle Jim over for Christmas anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
It's in the best interest of our family and in your spiritual welfare.
Yeah.
To remind you that Uncle Jim is not trustworthy.
Yeah. Well, thank you for indulging me on that one. All right, so this might be the last one, and I feel like there were several questions that came in on the topic of women in the church, women teaching. So the scripture says, Paul says, I do not permit a woman to teach. Women should remain silent in church. Does that mean women? But then you've also got, in Timothy, you've got or Titus, is it Titus, the exhortation that the older women should teach younger women. So is the biblical view that a woman should never teach the Bible? Is a woman allowed to do exegesis on Scripture? If so, when and where and how? Are there limits? Like, how should we be thinking about? How should women in the church be thinking about those questions?
Yeah, I think that we have to assess what Paul is addressing.
Yeah.
He's addressing a gathering of the entire church. So he's addressing the subject of women speaking in the large gathering.
Yeah.
And I think we're also speaking to women teaching. So, like, if a woman gets up on Sunday morning and says, on Thursday we're having an ice cream social, is that like sinful?
Right.
I don't think so.
Right.
I think that what we're talking about is a particular kind of thing, which is the office of teaching.
Right.
So, teaching the church as a whole.
Right. As
opposed to women maybe coming apart and engaging in a study of Scripture.
Right.
So I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's what was in view.
Yeah.
So whenever we're looking at Scripture, we're not just simply looking at words on a page. We're trying to think about what is the situation, what's the context.
How do we apply it?
We have to interpret it. And I think the treatment that I just made is fair. I mean, I don't think that Paul was condemning women announcing the ice cream social.
Right. Right.
He was condemning women exercising authority over men who were to exercise authority in their homes over their wives, in the interest of their wives, not just in their own ego-driven, sort of needs.
Right.
We live in a world today where everything gets reduced to that.
Yeah.
We have a very, I think, underdeveloped understanding of what authority is about. We confuse authority with power. We confuse authority with ego needs. We confuse authority with all sorts of things.
Right.
Authority is exercised in the interest of the author and the ones who have been authored.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good.
The people and the maker. So that's what it's all about. So if you're genuinely reflecting the will of the author, and the author says it's important that husbands and fathers are the ones who are speaking for me in this setting, then you say, okay, maybe I don't understand everything that's going on here, but I just go along just because of who told me to do it this way.
Right.
But I think that I do think we can think about it, we can analyze and say, why would God limit this to fathers? Why would God limit this to men? And I don't think it's hard to understand. Yeah,
it's good. And just to drive the point home and try to flesh it out for folks, I think obviously women are specifically older women are specifically instructed to teach and train younger women.
Yeah, like I think of my wife, she very naturally does that.
Yeah.
Now, my wife is not a Bible study leader. I mean, I don't think my wife has ever led a Bible study with anything more than children.
Yeah.
She just is not a person who's inclined to that kind of thing. Now, there are some women who are.
Yeah.
But she's definitely a mentor to many, many women. I mean, she gets phone calls from all over the place, women all over the country who want her opinion on what to do in this particular situation. She's very much a person who prays. That's her first mode. Right. My first mode is instruct. My wife's first mode is pray.
Right.
And that's often a great sort of division of labor in a house. I know my wife is praying for me all the time.
Yeah.
She's praying for everybody all the time.
Right.
And she has a great deal of influence because of her prayer life and because of her love and her interest in people.
Yeah.
So my wife has access. This. So let's just kind of step back.
Yeah.
Like in the neighborhood that I live in, my wife knows everybody in all the houses adjacent to us.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah.
She went over and introduced herself, and then she actually was invited in.
Yeah.
And they're showing her pictures of their grandchildren.
Right.
And she's exchanging cookie recipes.
Right.
And she's praying for them. You know what people think when I come to the door?
Yeah.
What's he selling?
Yeah.
Don't let that guy in.
Yeah, right.
So my wife can do things I can't do.
Right.
She immediately is loved and trusted by little people, children, and elderly people.
Yeah. My
granddaughters have second thoughts about me.
Right.
Like, who's that guy?
Yeah.
He's kind of scary.
That's right.
So I think that women are really selling themselves short by thinking that the way to have significance and to influence people is to do what the guy is doing.
Right.
There's a set of things that men tend to be better at.
Right.
And are equipped for.
Right.
And there are things that women tend to be better at and are equipped for.
Right.
For goodness sake, let's just enjoy the gifts we've been given.
Yeah. Well, and I think the counter argument would be, well, I was given particularly, I'm a particular woman who's got this gift of theological.
Well, let me tell you, chick.
Yeah.
I use that term on purpose.
Yeah.
There's not a man who has a masculine disposition who wants to know what you think.
That's a good word. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Including your husband.
Yeah, it's right.
That's
because women don't have an understanding of male hierarchy.
Yeah.
Males are they form hierarchies naturally.
Yeah.
You know how it works.
Oh,
You're a guy. You walk in the room and you're assessing yourself and comparing yourself to the other dudes.
Right.
And you're saying, okay, alpha,
Yeah.
beta.
Yeah, right.
You're immediately doing that.
Actually fascinating.
And by the way, I just want to, before I forget.
Yeah.
These chicks who think that they can pass as a guy because they've had their breasts cut off and they've taken a bunch of hormones, they're on the 0 of the scale of 10.
That's what I was going to say. Is I listened to a podcast once, and it was a story about a woman who had done just that, taken all these hormones, done the surgeries, and actually I think there's a book by a woman who I don't think she did anything chemical or medical, but she was able to impersonate a man for a year.
I think I saw that book. I know the one you're talking about.
And apparently she's like fully anti all of that stuff now. Like
she committed suicide.
Did she really?
Yeah, I read about it. Yeah.
Okay, it was a traumatic experience
because she ended up hating women.
Right. She grew to hate women because she was like, wow, and really sympathized with the plight of men in today's society. Well, the podcast I listened to, this woman did the hormones, did the whole thing, and she said she didn't realize how when men walk down a sidewalk past each other, how there is a way that they come as close as they can to each other to communicate dominance. She was like, this was invisible to me as a woman. I didn't know that if I'm walking down an alley, that I can't take a wide berth, or I'm actually inviting.
Yeah, you're inviting aggression.
It's like, so you have to like sort of, like all of that was completely invisible to her because she's lived life as a woman.
Right. Now, why did God make men that way? See, the first thing that feminists do is they see this as some kind of character flaw.
Right.
Rather than think about what's the design.
Right.
What's the purpose?
Right.
No, a guy will say, well, I think I know what the purpose is. Guys have to exercise a measure of control over their environment, so they're going to get a lot of people hurt.
Yeah.
Like when we think about why do young men form gangs and go on the periphery? It's because of the territory. They got to defend the territory. It's a very natural thing for young men to do.
Right.
And, it's not like a antisocial thing. It's actually a pro-social thing.
Right.
They're trying to defend their group's turf.
Right. Yeah, so just to kind of bring it home, I think men to a fault sometimes are so philosophical, so ideological that they can't make a decision about what beer to order, right? Without thinking about, well, what's the most biblical kind of beer to drink? Like what would Jesus have drunk? That's a fault that men have, but it's because I think men read scripture, read theology, read philosophy with this mission mindset of I got to apply this stuff so I can lead well, so I can complete the mission the right way. And I think if a woman has a talent for Bible study, a talent for exegesis,
it's great.
Great, but she has to do the same thing. What's the mission? What's the purpose? What direction is this pointed at? If it's I have a calling and a mission to raise children up to be the next generation of leaders and citizens, and I have a calling to support my husband and be his helper, then I can give that a purpose. But I think it's this unbounded sort of unsexed, detached from mission and purpose.
Well, it reflects a very low view of creation.
Right.
That there's no sort of front-loaded meaning to anything. And we live in a society that encourages that. Will often sort of kind of move women along or sort of encourage them to pursue certain ways of thinking and behaving. And just so any of the women out there who are listening know, even guys who deny all of the things that I've just said or we've talked about, deep down know.
Yeah.
And they'll talk about it when the girls aren't around.
That's right.
So we've been a part of those conversations.
Sure.
But a lot of times those guys are trying to kiss up and get favors and be approved of in certain environments that they want to be involved in. And whatever, But I think, though, that if a woman has a facility with theology and biblical study, should be encouraged to pursue that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty evident. And a lot of times, it's undeniable. You just look at the woman and see what she can do and say, well, yeah, man, you're really sharp.
Yeah.
But how does that work?
Right.
So, I'll read books written by women.
Sure.
It's not like I've got like this thing against reading books by women.
Right.
I'll read Marilyn Robinson or I've been doing a lot of work lately, on totalitarianism,
Well,
and,
I think I talk about Flannery O'Connor all the time as one of the greatest saints, that I'm aware of. I mean, she's just an amazing, godly woman.
Yeah, and I think that we can acknowledge that.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with acknowledging the gifts of the women that we know. But then the question is, how is it employed? Where is it exercised? Those kinds of things. So, I think about a person like Nancy Wilson.
Yeah.
Nancy's great. She's got a really significant ministry with women. She's a student of Scripture. She cares about it. She studies it. She shares what she learns. That's great.
Yeah. And I listen to Nancy's podcast, and I know I'm not the intended audience, but
Sure.
but my wife is, and I'm trying to lead my wife, and so I listen to Nancy and go, there's so much wisdom here. I benefit from it. It's stuff that I haven't thought about. Speaking of that family, I mean, Rebecca's book, even Exile, really talks very directly about this, and Rachel Jankovic's book, is
they're both
similar.
very sharp.
Yeah.
So my daughter knows them both, knows all three of those gals, and really loves them and respects them, and they've taken my daughter in, and met with her and stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah. Well, and I think, but if you look at everything those three women are doing, the mission is always pretty clear. Like it's always very clear that the mission is we're trying to be better wives, we're trying to be better mothers, we're trying to serve. We love the calling that God has given us as women, and we're trying to do that better. And so, our pursuit of higher education, better learning in this area is all directed towards the mission that God's given us. It's not. So I think the other piece of all of this is an honest awareness of the curse on Eve. Let's be honest about this, ladies. This is part of the curse.
Well, I also think that it's part of the creation order.
Sure.
So Adam was first. So there's a logic to that. So one of the things that Paul stresses is the firstness of Adam, not just the curse of Eve. And so let's say there was no fall. Does that mean that there would have been an egalitarian sort of world? No.
Right.
No. I mean, any institution requires some leader to oversee the work and to judge it and to apply discipline. Even when you've got, I'll just put my cards on the table. Even if there was never a fall, there would still be correction.
Sure.
You'd say to Adam would say to his son, no, that's not the best way to do this.
Yeah.
And the son would not have the kind of chafing.
Right.
But he would submit to his father's direction.
Right.
So it's not like if there had never bhad fall, no one would have ever needed anybody in charge.
Right.
But I do think that that's what the egalitarians teach.
Right.
The egalitarians believe that there had never been a fall, there would be no authority.
Everything would be totally flat.
Yep.
No, absolutely. And you have to you become a Unitarian if that's your vision of heaven or perfection, of utopia.
Right.
Is a world that's completely flat. You're a Unitarian. You're not serving the Trinitarian God. Where you've got a hierarchy and you've got submission and you've got.
Well, you just think about the created order. You've got seraphim.
Yeah.
And then you've got lesser, angelic creatures.
Yeah. Elohim. Yeah.
And then you've got it's hierarchy means sacred order.
Yeah.
So it's not as though so the contemporary or the modern outlook is this immediacy. Everything is sort of like unmediated.
Right.
So, we all have direct access to God. We're
Right.
not even sure what Jesus is for. In
Right.
other words,
Right.
he's the mediator between God and man.
Right.
We're not even sure why we need him.
Right.
But mediation is the way, the world sort of is structured, and it's a beautiful thing when you have the various. So anyway, this is a whole other conversation.
No, it's awesome. And when you have a perfect mediator, that's really, really good news.
Yeah.
That's really good news.
Right.
To have a perfect mediator. It's not me, but it's Christ.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to unpack there, but the basic idea, as we said, is this wasn't but be suspicious of the temptation that Eve has to usurp her husband. That's a real temptation. Don't act like you're above that, women. There is an order that God's instilled here, and there's a purpose and design. Some of it we is obvious, as you just stated, and some of it we have to obey without perfect understanding. Right. But the orientation ought to be, our orientation as believers ought to be, I want to obey. I don't want to see how close I can get to the fence. And so it's like Pastor Wiley said a woman can make an announcement about a potluck. So why can't I read scripture on Sunday? Or why can't I pray from the microphone? And I say this to my kids all the time is, if your orientation is, what's the absolute least I can do to be in, or what's the absolute farthest I can go without being out, then your orientation is not an orientation of love. I love the home I'm in. I love the house I'm in. I love my membership in the body of Christ. I want to get as far
or do you want to just
away from as I can.
Well, that, or you just want to sort of like be the one who makes the rules. So I've said this to my wife and my daughters-in-law and others a few times. I've said, babies know the difference between men and women.
Yeah.
And dogs do too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, right now my granddaughters are at a stage where they're clinging to their mother, which is like really good.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
That's a good thing. And when I step into the room, they're a little bit, who is this? Even though they've seen me dozens of times.
Right.
But I'm larger, scarier, deeper voice, all of these things. Same thing with dogs.
Hair on your face.
Yeah, they all, there's something animal about sort of I can just feel that he's bigger. He weighs more. He could do more damage. He takes up more space. That kind of stuff. Now, who should be speaking and reading Scripture?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Do we want to convey power?
Right.
Well, if you want to convey power, like, do you remember Up, that Pixar film?
Yeah.
Remember the Doberman? He's got the voice that's like high and squeaky?
Yeah, right.
And we all get the joke.
Right.
We all get the joke. Do we want the high squeaky reading the Bible? Yeah.
Right. Right.
So we all know that we like having the bass voice, for our daily scripture reading that we listen to on our Audible or whatever.
Exactly.
Why?
Yeah.
Because the world that we live in is meaningful. Babies are comforted by a higher voice. Mm-hmm. Why? It's part of the design.
Yeah.
So why do men raise their voice with a baby? Hello, little girl. That's why I was just talking to my daughter, my granddaughter last night, saying, hello, little sweetie. To kind of put her at ease.
Right.
Say, to communicate, I'm not going to harm you. Now, if I gave her the full, dad authoritative voice treatment, she'd start crying.
Exactly. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Why do we have such a hard time with this? Because we have a low view of creation.
Yeah.
This is kind of the Gnostic spirit of evangelicalism, particularly in the evangelical or the egalitarian circles.
Well, we're asking the question, and I think this is always the danger. This is one of the Gnostic kind of dangers of the church today is we're always asking. I feel like I hear this a lot in Reform circles. You hear the words something like, do we really need X? Like, does X really matter?
Or do we want to bind the conscience?
Do we want to bind the conscience on?
Yeah.
It's this reductionistic, like we've identified somehow the only we've weeded out every single thing that we think is potentially expendable, and we've come down to this one little kernel, which is justification by faith, and now we get to say, well, we've defined the one thing that matters, therefore nothing else really matters.
Well, I'm actually just got the green light from World Magazine to address this very subject. I just queried them today, and they got right back to me and said, go for it. So it's this matter of sort of biblical minimalism.
Yep.
So if we can't define it as law or gospel, then it doesn't matter. It's sort of like, whatever. But there's a large body of material in the Bible that doesn't fit law and gospel.
Right.
Now, some people try to shoehorn it into those categories, but it's called wisdom.
Yeah.
So wisdom matters.
Right.
And wisdom is the exercise of good judgment in the situation that you find yourself in. So what are we doing when we approach this minimalistically? Essentially, we're saying, well, you know what? I'll give you an example. If you struggle with homosexual temptation, that doesn't disqualify you from being a pastor, because lots of pastors struggle with other temptations.
Yeah. Who are you to judge?
Are we making that? Yeah. Are we making that? Is that genuinely equivalent? First of all,
right.
And do we have nothing to work with? I mean, let's take a look at what's known as the Lavender Mafia in the Catholic Church, and all of the sexual abuse that we see there by guess whom?
Yeah.
Homosexuals.
Yeah.
Now that we can dress it up and call it pedophilia, but what we're talking about is sexual perversion.
Yeah.
Let's keep those people as far away from positions of authority as possible. And it doesn't mean that those people aren't part of the church, or are, but there's no right to being an elder. It's not like every single person in the church has the right to be an elder.
Right.
There are criteria that you have to pass muster with in order to be, and being above reproach.
Yeah, it is a higher standard.
And then, what does being above reproach mean? I think it includes certain kinds of temptation.
Right.
There's just certain people who are struggling with certain things that we just don't hand the keys to those folks.
Well, and I mean, we were talking about this earlier. I would include gluttony. If you've got somebody who is morbidly obese, it's like, hey, brother, get that under control, and then let's talk about.
Right, I agree.
Right. I mean, the word you talked about in your book, the word is a faithful or a good household manager. Which implies the term household there is a loaded term that means more than mowing your lawn. It actually is talking about your financial affairs. It's talking about your business. So, have you proven yourself to be somebody who knows how to lead people and hire and fire and manage, people and take care of your customers and hit budget and hit timelines like those? That's not subjective. Those are actual things you can go back and look at. You can read the Google, reviews or whatever, and is this guy's a bad name around town because he rips people off? That matters. That matters when it comes to being an elder.
Yeah. Yeah, so are we so desperate for elders that we're just kind of lowering standards? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Anyway, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, well, this has been a lot of fun. I feel like there's another couple hours worth of stuff to talk about, so we'll have to just do it again. But thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Larson. It's been a lot of fun.